Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host. In honor of Veterans Day, this week's episode is a little different. Longtime listeners are aware that before I moved to Hollywood, I served 5 years in the Air Force as a combat camera officer. My first assignment out of college was at Vandenberg Air Force Base, California, 1993 to 96, and my guests today all served with me there. Let's go around the table. For our listeners at home, each of you, please share how long you served in the Air Force, the rank at which you retired or separated, and then what you did when we were at Vandenberg. First, Jim Stayton.
Hello, I had 22 years in the Air Force. I was a master sergeant when I retired from Vandenberg, and I was a photojournalist and superintendent of motion media.
Well, Jim, it's great to see you here again. Let's keep going from there. Bruce Dzitko, you're up next.
I retired as a master sergeant at Vandenberg, just like Jim. Did 26 years. I had a real cobbled together career there. I was there forever, which is unheard of in the Air Force to stay at a place so long. I was there just over 18 years. Started out in the motion picture lab, running the wet side of that, kind of graduated over into the still side. From there, got into the whole flying arena of aerial photography, deployed a lot and had a blast. And they practically had to kick me out. So that's how much fun I was having. Now I live in South Dakota, and I'm probably the only guy on this panel that does nothing in the visual communication field. So you guys might have to bring me up to speed with everything. I heard it's digital now. Is that for real?
All right. All right, Bruce, we'll come back around on that. Let me introduce the rest of the folks we've got here. Fred Johnson, you're up.
Hey, Frederick Johnson. I served for just over 7 years, about 7.5 years at Vandenberg with these guys. I was a senior airman when I left, and I left and went to Silicon Valley and sort of did the whole gold rush chasing pixels thing up here. I'm still up here. And I was a photographer when I was in. Jim Stayton was a mentor, and the mean master sergeant. He wasn't mean. He's a crusty old teddy bear.
I'll second that.
Well, we're pretty well represented on the we're pretty well represented on the photo side. But Al Pedroza, tell us what you were doing.
Albert Pedroza. I served a total of 11 years. 1 extra year. I was supposed to do 10, but served 1 extra year after 9/11, after stop loss. When I was at Vandenberg, I left there as a senior airman to go on to Syracuse University to participate in the military motion media studies program. Was the aerial videographer there.
All right. Well, guys, I think really glad you guys are all here today. Very excited about catching up with all of you. It's been a really long time since we've done anything like this. Let's start to put some context for our civilian audience about combat camera itself. Now, we're not going to go deep into the history. For those who are curious about Air Force combat camera, I'd encourage you to go to a website that one of the squadrons has put together. It's at usafcombatcamera.org. And you /history/. They talk a lot about how photography came together in the military. So we're not going to go deep on that, but let's let people understand a little bit about how it fit together for us and what we were doing in the larger picture of wartime photography. Jim, you could probably kick us off because you were probably there when it started.
Oh yeah, I remember I was in England running a combat camera unit out of Alconbury, and I got the assignment for Vandenberg, and so I immediately called to find out what kind of job I was going to. Vandenberg had been my first assignment, so I understood the mission of the unit, but I was on my retirement assignment and was really looking for somewhere to kick back. And Fred assured me that they didn't really do much but take pictures of launches and hang out a lot. So I said, I'm on my way. And of course, the minute that I hit the ground, Haiti took off. Or was it Haiti? Yeah.
Yeah, it was Haiti.
Yeah. And we immediately went into the combat camera mode with setting up digital imaging, transmissions, and downrange communications were an issue, keeping track of our people that were forward-based. It was the first time that I had actually experience things at that level. So it wasn't kicking back. We began really pushing forward, trying to display the technology and capture images and move them around via digital rather than processing film.
You know, Jim, we're going to dive into that. I want to take a step back and just in terms of combat camera, what we did. Sometimes people who aren't familiar with it, I usually say that basically we were trained to provide audio-visual support in threat environments, so that
we did that too.
Yes, expert videographers, expert photographers, but also we were all weapons trained. We all had our nuclear, biological, chemical training, basically to deploy into a threat environment, but basically people could be shooting at you and still do our job. That was kind of the goal of it overall. When people ask you guys, do you tell that same kind of story, or do you add some nuance to it or something different?
Depends on who's asking. I mean, I think we all take it for granted, but what's key here is back in the day, or I think we all know what we mean by the day, back when we were in Avis and we weren't underneath the comm squadron, we weren't underneath local wings. We were tasked, the people that pushed our button to say, go do this, go to Haiti, the guys up at JCCC and the Joint Staff. It wasn't local public affairs offices. It was like from bosses on high, which allowed all of us to run autonomously. They would say, we need a 4-man team, 2 still, 2 video, 1 flyer each. We need them in Haiti. We need them in Panama. We need them wherever. BFE, usually. You're going to report right back to JCCC. You don't report to the local commanders. You don't report to the public affairs office. It was a higher mission. It was a global priority versus local.
Yeah, I think so as well.
I always try to incorporate the historical part of capturing all this imagery, because without it, we wouldn't be watching all these documentaries on Netflix or Prime about Vietnam or any other war that we've been in without combat camera capturing that imagery. So I always like to incorporate the historical part of capturing that imagery.
Yeah, Al, that's a really good point, just about, and again, the guys who are there taking pictures, filming that so that can use it. But again, operating with the combat units. And to your point, Bruce, we were Air Force, but when you deployed, you were part of a joint group of everyone that was doing photography on the ground and working for the joint commander, as you said, not for a specific unit or that sort of organization. That was the idea.
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
Communication, right? I was going to say any kind of visual communication. And what to your earlier question, Rob, when people, civilians, ask me, what I did or what it's like to do what we did in the military, I always paint the picture. I bring it down a couple of notches, and I paint the picture of a base, an Air Force base, because it's the only ones I have experience with, being kind of a small, self-contained city. Especially ones that are overseas. But it's a small self-contained city, and the visual communications squadron is the responsibility is to support that city in all their needs, whether it be forensic, investigative photography, sports, portraiture, whatever kind of visual video, all this stuff. So we did all that stuff when it's not time to suit up and go to battle like an Avenger, right? So you're doing that normal civilian Clark Kent stuff during the normal 9 to 5, and then when the sirens go up, then it's time to, do the A-team suit up and, do the real thing. And I always painted the picture between the two. You guys remember, there's always the photographers, there's still photographic specialists, and then the photojournalists or the PJs, right? So. And the photographers always wanted to be the PJs. That was the next level. Those were the cool guys that got to go everywhere. We got to stay back and do the stuff and support the base until we were quote ready to go out. So that's kind of the picture for people that are that don't have experience with the military or with these kinds of units. It's always like it's normal 9 to 5 for the most part during non-stressful wartime situations, and then all bets are off and all units, whatever, clocks don't matter, when it's time to go.
Yeah, good point. Good point, Fred. It's sort of that again, preparing for that deployment mission but then the rest of the time sort of being in-house audiovisual, whatever that meant for the unit that we were at. And we'll talk more about that. It's probably a good time to point out that listeners, many of you might not know that my name is Rob, because it's always Skid for my Hollywood time. But this group predates all of that. And I think Skid was a high school nickname that I had just about choked off through my time in the military before moving back to LA. So
we're also LT.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was a lieutenant, as I mentioned before. Vandenberg was my first assignment in the military, and so I was the greenest of the group, I'm sure.
We could bring up some of those stories.
we'll get to them. We'll get to them. Let's add a little more context to the picture of Vandenberg then. So there's two main, at the time I'm coming in, you guys correct me if I'm misremembering, there's two main squadrons, one in Charleston, South Carolina, and one down in LA. At Norton Air Force Base. Those are the main combat camera squadrons of they're fully, right? At that time, was that still true?
Well, Norton was the queen bee. Norton was our headquarters for Avis and combat camera. We were at detachments and operating locations throughout the world. Mm-hmm. Charleston was just one of them. Once the consolidation of the units and the McPeak era and no more Avis and no more this, no more that, that's kind of when Charleston came into their own.
I see.
As the lead for combat camera, because at all the operating locations, and Vandenberg was one of them, we immediately fell underneath the local comm squadron. And Jim, I think you and I were in England when that actually happened, but Vandenberg was able to hold on for a long time until the manning level got to the point where they could no longer justify being their own squadron, if I remember correctly. You know how that went down? And then we fell underneath comm squadron.
Yeah, I think it was a mandated thing though for Vandenberg. It was just they were one of the last to fold under. Their mission was so diversified. There were so many things that we actually had to support there.
Yeah. And that's when Charleston stepped up and Hill. And then I think Lackland, was it Lackland? There was the video unit down there was put online. And then the 4th at March was the reserve unit. And that was it for titled combat camera units.
So when I showed up, we were already part of the 30th Communications Squadron. As you mentioned, sort of the reorganization under McPeak. Everything had to be on a local unit. And so 30th Communications Squadron in the 30th Space Wing. Right, under Space Command. And Vandenberg's mission, even before that, was to launch rockets, basically, because you could launch a rocket from there and do a polar orbit without going over occupied areas. I remember that being part of the justification. And for those who don't know, Vandenberg in California is right at the bottom, that corner that crosses there, about an hour south of San Luis Obispo, an hour north of Santa Barbara. And you could launch rockets from there. But in doing so, there was a ton of motion picture equipment and filming and just all related to the launches that we were all part of the same unit. Were they if this happened before you got there, were they their separate unit? And then there was also combat camera, or was it all sort of one unit before it went under the comm squadron?
It was a 1369th. Yeah. Sorry, Jim. Go ahead. It was one unit, but yeah.
Yeah, it was 1369th, and it was controlled out of Norton at San Bernardino.
So it was run out of Norton at the time until they broke it up and then tucked it under the comm squadron.
Yeah, it was a tenant unit under Norton. Again, like you said, they wanted to consolidate leadership and one wing, one boss, one kind of one point of contact on each base. They didn't like tenant units any longer. And we weren't the only ones that got snapped up like that. Comm squadron, weather squadron, a lot of the guys that were tenant units found themselves underneath the local wing, who they had tried very hard over the years to make enemies of. So overnight, you found yourself in bed with them, and it's like, wow, okay, this is going to be fun.
I think another significant part of that was, even though the daily mission of the audiovisual services there was to support space and missile launching, which are two distinct things, the focus that we picked up was that we were more inclined to support Space Command requirements, Air Force Space Command requirements, and some U.S. Space Command requirements. And it actually ended up giving us deployments around the world, supporting the remote sites, the remote communications and tracking sites, to help document the activities of Space Command, which I think before that were lackluster in the sense of having photographers show up at your door to take pictures.
Agreed.
Or
Good point.
Video.
Let's talk more about that, Jim, as far as supporting Space Command. So you Air Force Space Command included, yes, the satellite stuff, but also the missiles that were up in the northern tier. And we would visit all of those bases and provide them audiovisual support.
Yeah, especially for their inspections, when the Inspector General would go in to test them and check their operations and how they were performing their wartime duties, we would send video and still photographers to travel with them and document the success.
And a lieutenant. Yeah, I got to go as well sometimes on those.
The mandatory lieutenant.
You fortunately had a good crew of people to take you along and keep you out of trouble.
Mostly.
And another thing about having the missiles, Vandenberg, we were part of the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty that got inspected by the Russians.
Oh, right.
And so we also supported that. I was on the
start team,
arrival team, where I had to go into a room with all the Russians and document their arrival on the base, and then they would go out and spend 3 or 4 days looking through the missile sites to make sure we weren't hiding anything. Dare I say anything that they were also spending a lot of time at the BX?
Santa Barbara too.
Yeah, buying up American stuff and loading up their plane to take home with them.
I remember being at Arlington National Cemetery. That was one of the stops that they had actually made during their tour. And I actually had 2 generals, one Air Force and one Russian general, pin A1C on me at the time, Airman First Class, which I thought was really cool because 1, it was Arlington, and 2, Russian and Air Force general pinning A1C on me. It was kind of cool.
You actually traveled with the Russians as they went through the different sites where we stayed at Vandenberg. So you went TDY and temporary duty and traveled.
I got a chance to travel with them one time when they went down in a silo on Vandenberg, and I remember being the airman fly on the wall. Jim, you probably were the one that sent me out there, right? And I think
no one else wanted to do it.
Yeah, exactly. But I remember, the spiel from the base commander about, the technology in there. And I just remember I think this was back in the era of the Palm Pilot. Remember those? So I remember him drawing the parallels between there's more processing power in a Palm Pilot than it takes to light one of these things off. It was crazy. I was like, wow, okay, I feel safe. So.
And for folks who are not aware, we had missile silos at Vandenberg for testing purposes, because every once in a while they would identify a random missile from, Minot or whatever base, and they would bring it out and then prove that we could launch it out to the ocean, that just things were still working. And so, they could, it was legit. And so the Russians would come and take a look on that.
Something else Fred mentioned that I think is really interesting too. As photographers, we were flies on the wall. We heard and saw a lot of things that we were never supposed to hear, never supposed to see. And they're still, in our minds today, but can't talk about them.
Right. Yeah,
not on,
you're just back there with your camera, trying to blend in with the wallpaper, right?
Turn around till she puts her clothes back on, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
I'm not here, Colonel. I'm not here.
At least nothing we're going to talk about on this podcast.
They all wanted video anyway. Al got all the action.
Right? Exactly. With his big shoulder-mounted bazooka camera, right?
That was a huge camera. That thing was like 40 pounds with batteries.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Those things were huge.
Well, I think when we talked about going out and like going out to Colorado or the bases there and for the IG inspection and putting these things together, it was basically because our equipment was designed to pack into boxes and deploy. And so basically we used the same sort of setup in a just non-threat environment. Usually Estes, Colorado, not so threatening. Like remember there's times we went out there for the, what was it, Single Airman Week or something like that?
Singles conference.
Yeah, Singles. Oh yeah, that was a good one. That was. We'll come back. We'll come back to that. But let's talk about the mobility. So that was a big mission. And in fact, I got to be the officer that was responsible for the mobility program. And I got to say, it was probably one of my favorite things in the Air Force, where we figured out how we could be doing our day job, but again, be able to mobilize if they needed 2 still photographers or a full team of 8 folks, or Bruce, what you guys had as far as that mobile processing lab that I'm not sure that there was anywhere else. I think we had the Air Force's only one of those. Is that right?
We're the pilot unit. Yeah, there's 2 other units who are trying to stand up, but by the time they really started, vans were built. I don't remember what other 2 bases were supposed to get them, but by the time that all came to fruition, digital had already taken over. Because what we were essentially doing was shooting slides, processing on site in these vans, and then turning right around and having to scan them on a Kodak scanner. So it was that transitional period. So it was pretty cool moving those things around. Is great team. Took a lot of teamwork to move them. Took a lot of expertise that doesn't really exist in the Air Force anymore, because the vans that we used were repurposed from Vietnam era reconnaissance vans that were used for tactical reconnaissance. So you had like me and maybe a handful of guys that knew how to actually put the mobilizers on them, put the wheels on them, set them up, tear them down. That's kind of cool, but it was right at the threshold. I think we only deployed them. I think we went to Italy during Desert Storm, and you and I drug them up to someplace in Northern California. Someplace north of Paso Robles for an exercise.
That's right. We did do the exercise out there with them. Yeah, just when they were doing some sort of when we actually did deploy under simulated conditions rather than just right up to the edge of pretending we were getting on a plane. We actually went up north that one time.
We actually took them up to Nova Scotia for a Canadian exercise. We were up there for 10 days. And it worked like it's supposed to. I mean, we fit the whole shebang on one C-130 to include the team. Got them up to Nova Scotia, set it up, ran out of it, processed, scanned, and we took an MR-SAT. That worked great. And we were able to get a FTP line locally, and we were able to get our stuff to JCCC. But yeah, that MR-SAT, man, what a boat anchor,
I know. Yeah.
Well, let's talk more about. So we're really in this period of time, at least while I'm there, and in the years before and after that, we are at this sort of cusp of things going digital. And so on some areas we're at I think in everything we're at the very cutting edge, but a lot of it's sort of hit and miss. And these Inmarsats are probably a good example of where we had this box basically the size of a tent, right? Like it's like an 8-man tent or something, and this like large container, and you basically open it up, and then you would set up the dish and find the satellite so that you could transmit the photos back to wherever they needed to go. You guys know more about it than I did, other than dragging that box.
In theory,
for the technically implied, I think it was 2,400 baud at the time.
Oh yeah, fast. Lucky.
Yeah,
it would take just an endless amount of time to transmit just one image, and we had a budget to use the Inmarsats. Those things were really expensive. And I can remember sitting in the office. Nobody wanted to use it to transmit images, but you had to show use on the Inmarsat when you deployed. And I can remember sitting in the office and getting a phone call from Jack's Valley in Colorado Springs, and it was Fred trying to run up the minutes on his Inmarsat to show that he was using it. And he just wanted to chat for a while.
Yeah.
That thing was magical. I mean, once you got it going, I mean, in retrospect, it was like, it was ancient, but at the time, it was cutting edge. It was like, look at this, going from film, right? Okay, film, and you shoot it, and then you got to mail it and process it, all that stuff to be on the edge with those digital. Remember the Kodak DCS 420s, I think it was, those big Nikon with the hard drive.
420s,
Yeah, going from that to somewhere else from the field was magic, just being able to do that. And now of course we do it with our phones, but it was crazy back then.
It was, that's true.
On the still side of the house, digital was pretty amazing for us. We had the big heavy 100-pound Kodak printer and the DCS cameras and things. But the thing that most sticks in my mind was once we had a real world incident. I can't remember what it was, but they wanted images at Air Force Base Command in Colorado Springs right away. And we actually set up 4 laptops with images on them and went to landlines and using Timbuktu, which was a peer-to-peer networking protocol, we were able to, with 4 laptops, start transmitting images into Colorado Springs. And they were pretty amazed by that, just that the technology. We were always held in really high esteem by the upper ranks, because to us what we were doing was the equivalent of middle-aged magic, being able to get pictures across the globe so quickly.
So you hear the demeanor in Jim's voice it's like, very calm, collected, and matter of fact. That's how he was back then too, because he'd be like, it was a pain in the ass to set that Inmarsat up and find the satellites. It was like literally like threading a needle. And he'd be like, yeah, go set it up real quick. Yeah, you can do it. Let me know when it's done. So you're like, well, if he said it, if it sounded easy when he said it, I should be able to get this done. And so I'm having flashbacks, Jim.
Yeah. What do you mean you're having problems?
Yeah. What are you, inferior?
Everybody knows where that satellite is out back.
Bruce.
You can always make a phone call, though. I'll tell you what, man. You might not be able to send an image for a while, but you can always get back to somebody on the phone. It's like, we kind of got it working, but we know where the satellite's at. But pumping images, man, it took forever.
Mm-hmm.
God, it's slow.
Al, you had a lot of digital coming online with the Beta SP and the Avid systems, and that was all pretty high-end technology there. Being able to just have your images on a hard drive and plug them in, which I think those big boxes that were about 1.5 feet long probably held 2 meg. I don't know.
Yeah, but even still, the video files were large. I mean, it's not like it is today, where a hard drive back then was maybe like 200 megabytes, which is absolutely nothing now. We're talking terabytes.
Yeah.
But those Avid machines were pretty cutting edge at the time, like being able to edit.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when I went to Hollywood, it was like really rare. And then the time in between, like we had suites of them. They would sit idle, and they wouldn't sit idle in a more cost-effective environment, I guess you'd say. But the military bought them for us, and
industry
you guys were editing video there, at the time. And so that was pretty cutting edge what you guys were working on. What other stuff on the video side did you kind of see in that transition now?
Cameras. So basically, it was still analog, but going from High 8 to Beta SP, High 8 was natively a poor choice of tape because it was going to fall apart regardless in playback or record. So you were lucky if you got to use and record a High 8 tape one time without dropout. If you try to degauss it and reuse it again, forget it. Because the tape just would fall apart. Beta SP was a little more solid, didn't have as much error, was able to be reused. So it made a little more financial sense. But unfortunately, the Air Force spent so much money on High 8 equipment. They wanted you to use High 8 because that's what they bought. It's unfortunate. Yeah, not everybody got the opportunity to use Beta SP like we had at Vandenberg.
We had the Beta SP for the high-end stuff, but then you're right, it wasn't part of our deployment package. When we deployed, it was the high cameras and equipment that we were putting into those green boxes on that pallet.
Hey, I have a confession to make on this technology end of things too. When I first got to Vandenberg, along with trying to get people deployed to Haiti and figure out where my household goods were because they were stuck in Texas, and I was having to kind of dig through uniforms looking for something clean. They came down and they asked me to do a new mission statement. for the photojournalism department, which I was running at the time. So I wrote up, you know, the standard nomenclature, you know, yeah, we support the worldwide activities of Air Force Space Command and document this and do this and do that. And at the very end, I put, we were also responsible for research and development for Air Force Space Command on digital imaging for still photography. And all of a sudden, my budget skyrocketed. Nobody told me to put that in there. It was just like a throwaway line, but I'm sure it got me thousands and thousands of dollars. Because at one point, we had bought a new, to give you the time frame, it was a Mac 8100. We put 200 mega RAM in it. It cost us $10,000 for that 200 mega RAM. And I was walking around wanting to know if anybody wanted to trade a car for the sand. But that brought us a lot of money and a lot of equipment because we were the guys who were suddenly responsible for test and evaluation of still imaging equipment.
When you told that story earlier about the folks at headquarters getting images and being really interested in that, getting them quick, it does remind me of some of that incident in Vandenberg, and I'm not sure exactly who was involved in it, but we were, I think, for the first time, sending live video images back to the folks in the little command room. And I remember very specifically where there was some incident, I don't know if it was a fire or what the incident was, but then our guys would deploy. We had a camera that was sending imagery back to where the base commander and the staff group was. But it was very interesting that they now had the illusion that they understood what was on the ground more than they actually did. It was my first concern about that, where they kept telling the ground commander, you know, do this or do that, or let me see this, when they didn't really have a 360 perspective of what was going on. And I had some concern about having that live imagery, but not the full picture available to folks who are making decisions, and that you could misunderstand what's going on the ground if you're only looking through the camera lens. Do you guys remember that? Do you guys remember when we were putting that technology together?
That was more of the magic. We put microwave. Was it microwave on the?
It was microwave. We had it in the aircraft too.
We would put it on the helicopters, and we had some of the units that were used in instrumentation for the space launch, the long lens stuff. We also had them on those, and we were able to broadcast right into the command post for the wing commander and the 12th Air Force commander. Right, we were 12th Air Force, 14th Air Force,
14th Air Force. Yeah, and
that was more of the magic, where they were just, you guys need some more money? Can you keep this train going?
But dude, Jim, you have no idea, dude. That's still a pain in a lot of people's ass. When I got out of the Air Force, I worked for the Missile Defense Agency, and they're partly on their visual communication side. Anyway, we had pad cameras on all our LS. Well, through this and that technology, we were able to beam it to the command post and the emergency operations center. So that suddenly overrode everything. They wanted to see the pad cameras, and could we pivot one off the asset, which is why the cameras were there in the first place. Can you bring it up and can you pivot it at 90 degrees north, because there's a wildfire and the commander in the command post wants to see it. So to this day, that magic has a legacy. They want to sit there and visually see what's going on, but like Rob was saying, they kind of miss the big picture. Like you said, they're focused so much on that one element. Look at us. We're seeing live video of the fire. Isn't that cool? And in reality, they're not really talking to who's on the ground, who's there. I am kind of sidetracking.
That same technology, you know, we had a $40,000 AM Pro projector that we picked up. I don't know if y'all remember that.
Oh yeah.
But it was in the conference room, and the first LLV launch from Slick 6, the Space Launch Complex 6, was a unique launch. And where in the past everybody would go out to watch the launch, which is a space launch from South Vandenberg, we went to the conference room for the first time because we had it piped in, and we got to watch it fail. But even the folks who were using the technology didn't step outside to watch. We were actually tracking it with range cameras, watching it around the conference room table, drinking coffee. And it started tumbling, and it was like, it looked like it was going to recover, and then everybody started laughing. It's like, no, they never recover. Those things are pretty fragile, really. People don't realize, but those
you'll go around.
Those launch systems are pretty flimsy.
You know, in the space of the technology, the other story I remember, and this is to admit my lack of prescience on this front, that we had a couple of folks assigned every week to be on call in case there was an incident of some kind on the base. Again, whether it's a fire or, you know, something we needed still and video guys right away. And at the time, cell phones were just coming out and being more available. And they're like, oh, we need to have those cell phones. And I remember talking to the team and saying, do you want someone to be able to reach you all the time? Like be able to call you without thinking about what they need to know? We do not want to be carrying these things around, you know, all the time. People are just going to abuse them. And it's just going to, of course, you know, that's the world we live in now without simpler times.
Yeah, well, I remember during a major fire on the base, up on the north end of the base, and people need to understand, Vandenberg's 98,000 acres, and it covers 37 miles of coastline. And there was a fire up on the north base, and it was being documented.
Was that from a launch that went bad?
I don't think so, but I just remember that I was stuck on a hill up on north base with a radio. I could receive signals from the squadron ranch. I think their call sign was ranch. I could receive signals from them, and then I would transmit it to the people on the north base. I was the go-between, and I was out there on that hill for like 12 hours, and all I did was, yeah, I heard you, and then I would repeat it so that the folks up on the north base could.
That might have been from a failed launch, because one of the very first jobs I did for the Air Force was a launch, and it had actually failed. I didn't know what a failure launch looked like. So I remember it was myself and John Noon. We were on the ground, and I'm videotaping, and he's like, oh man, we got to get out of here. You know, the launch went bad. They blew up the rocket or the missile, whatever it was. I think it was a missile.
I remember that.
And I'm thinking, oh man, this is my very first gig, and I'm like all into it. Oh, this is so cool. Big old chunks of metal coming down, fire all around us. And I'm just thinking, this is part of the gig, you know? This is awesome. And John's like, no, we got to get out of here. And I'm like, hold on, I'm getting it all, you know? So by the time we packed everything, we're surrounded in fire. We're in this, I don't know, it was a Chevy GOV at the time, a government vehicle. We drove through flames, make it back to base just to turn around and say, because at that time, they were having people, airmen, go back, grab a shovel, and create fire breaks to keep it from spreading. So that was my first Air Force gig at Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Well, you know,
that's the one I remember. Do you remember? I think that was that was a Titan that blew up, if I remember, which is the largest space launch vehicle, right? You guys remember that thing was just huge, out of Slick 6, like Jim was talking about. And if it's the one I'm thinking about, I was in the air on that one. You know how they send the still photographer and the videographer with the doors open on the UH-1 shooting around the pad. So I'm in the air, and I remember, you know, you're up there forever, and of course you have to launch in the middle of the night, you know, so you're just like, crap, okay, just launch it already, right? So we're sitting there, and then the thing lights off, and it's, like Jim said, it's supposed to go out over the Pacific downrange. This thing veers and starts heading towards Santa Maria. So boom, goes off like the biggest Roman candle you've ever seen, just, and all these pieces come back down to the base. I remember we were 3 miles away from that thing in the air in basically a bucket of aircraft fuel with the doors open. And I remember this giant flash of light. And the one thing you don't want to hear when you're in that situation with one thing strapping you to the bottom of the aircraft is your young lieutenant pilots saying, holy shit, and veering the aircraft in the opposite direction. And then we landed, Albert. We were on the ground like you guys, because everything, of course, at after that happened, became classified. You got to go take pictures of, jackrabbits trying to get out of the way, burned up, So, so we were doing all that. Yeah, that was crazy. That was a crazy, terrifying but exciting adventure. Never got to see any of the film, of course, because it went away. But it was exciting.
Well, I remember Fred's moment of at last for the last Atlas. I was on South Vandenberg. It was my first space launch that I worked, and I was south of the pad where the Atlas was being launched. It was the last of its class. And it kept getting delayed, and I think there was some anxiety about, let's just get this thing into space. So I was south of it, which it meant it was going out over our head. And I'm standing around, it's foggy as heck. You can't see 20 feet in front of you just about. And they do the launch because apparently the pad is clear enough that the range cameras can track it. But we can't see anything from where we're at except a glow through the fog. And I watched all the old guys, the guys with knowledge and everything, they slowly start moving toward the tracking mounts with the big cameras on them that can't see anything, because the tracking mounts provide protection. If the thing blows up and pieces come raining down, they're going to roll underneath, they're going to lay on the ground and roll underneath the tracking mounts and get out of the way of whatever might come down, because we were blind to what was going on. And that was a big lesson that day.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me, Jim, that, the guys who had these huge mounts that had high-speed film on them and all the photography to get these launches so they could study when something went wrong down to the split second. These guys were not uniformed guys. They were guys who that was their job and had been doing it in some cases for 20 or, dare I say, even 30 years, right? Like those guys were an institution on their own.
You guys remember Shanahan? That guy, he came to Vandenberg in 1962. The year I was born, he came there as a two-striker. And he was my boss over in Mopic. Talk about institution.
When I was an airman back in 1974, I was stationed at Vandenberg. It was my first assignment. And just to date myself, color imagery was pretty new as a mass media. And some of those guys were there in 1994 when I returned to Vandenberg. Some of those same people were still working in the, we called it the instrumentation branch, I believe, with the range tracking cameras. And something a lot of people don't know is we had tracking cameras as far south as San Diego, and those lenses were over $500,000. They were huge. They actually put them in the back of pickup trucks to transport them. Just the lens. When you see when you have a tracking camera on a space launch going for a polar orbit, and there's a camera recording the separation of the shroud, releasing like an alligator's mouth opening, and it peels away from the shroud peels away from the spacecraft, and you can see the spacecraft sitting on the booster. It's a pretty amazing thing. The things we got to see and experience were just unfathomable to most people.
I liked the initial launch when the door opens and then it actually shoots out. That's something that you don't see every day. That was, to me, like the best part of the launch was seeing the door slide back and the missile take off.
Yeah, we got to see those things. Most people don't ever get to see that.
We would see the process from the aircraft or the spacecraft or the rocket being delivered to the base and crawling to the to the pad, all the way through to the assembly in the clean room of the payload, the satellite. So we have to document all that, and then the erection of the thing, and then the launch and all that stuff. So yeah, we got to see it from literally soup to nuts all the way through, even in disasters like we were talking about before.
Yeah,
received through launch. And a lot of that came, you guys mentioned the anomaly. We've all been there for one or two, but what happens after the anomaly is that photograph you took at 2:00 in the morning showing the rocket scientists ensuring that those cannon plugs are put together, because if it wasn't put together properly, then that may have been the cause of the anomaly. And the only proof that he did or did not do it, he or she, is that photograph that Fred or Jim or Bruce or Al, who any of us got. And if it weren't for that imagery, you screw it up. that a $1 zillion satellite just gets blown up on the pad, and only proof that it was hooked up right is your imagery. So at the time, it seems like a pain in the ass. It's like a Saturday night. You really don't want to be there. And you stand around in those clean suits, waiting and waiting and waiting for them to be like, okay, come here. And you get 5 images of the cannon plug or a board or whatever. And then you go back to leaning against a wall in a clean suit, for another 5 hours. And time, it seems so, it's just like a waste of time. But in reality, it is just critical.
Something that the folks that are not tuned into the actual receipt through launch and everything may not understand is when they identify why something blew up, why something had an anomaly and didn't make it to orbit, is that there's sensors all through the launch system, all through the launch vehicle. And they're actually able to read that telemetry and see where the telemetry starts ending first, where the telemetry dies. That takes them to the area that the system failed. If a valve goes bad, those sensors are the first thing to die.
And we can find the actual images of where that started to go down because you've
That's how they
documented
do
it the whole time.
Because that's all been documented from, as it says, a receipt through launch.
You guys, I want to talk about another major event that was all hands on deck, and that is that Vandenberg would host the annual Space Command competition called Guardian Challenge, where all those different units would send their best teams, and then they would compete for a week or two. I can't remember how long that they were actually with us. And then we had under McAllister, who was running our audiovisual side, he came up from Norton, I think, or whatever, from another unit, and basically turned it into this 3-day Academy Award style show where we were doing video. You had to do an intro video for everything, and then we were doing a live feed of the actual event, and there was a camera feed for inside the room. And I just remember it was this massive, massive production that everybody was involved in. Or am I blowing it out? Was it smaller to you guys in your memory? But
it was huge.
Major production.
Nobody
It
slept
was
for a week.
gigantic.
We're sleeping under our desks.
Yeah.
And
Or at the
Fred
hangar.
was supposed to leave, and I reined him in, and I sent a letter to his new boss. Fred was leaving the airport, and I sent a letter to his new boss. Do you remember this, Fred?
I do, now that you mentioned it. I remember
It was be comfortable in the fact that Fred is still coming your way. We're sorry we had to keep him for 3 days. So have a beer and know you made the right decision.
That was classic. Yeah. What a time. Yeah. Those kinds of exercises were, like I was saying before, the clocks go away, right? And it's just,
Yes.
you stay there, and maybe you could squeeze in some time to sleep, And at the time, it's just this a royal pain, right? It's like, man,
It's the
I want
mission.
to go home. Yeah, I want to go home. I want to go do this, but then you understand that, hey, everybody's there, so it's not that bad, and you're all having a good time, and for the most part, joking around. Everybody's tired, but in retrospect, it was memories that can't be replaced. But while you're in it, much like other things, sucked, right? Because you're like, I don't want to do this. It's going on forever. I'm tired. I'm hungry.
As I recall, Fred had been hired by the San Jose Mercury News. And I remember him needling us because he had a T1 line right directly into his lap, right directly into his desk. And they were giving him anything he wanted. We're paving his way. And I go back to the digital imaging and the way that we were in the forefront of technology. And that allowed Fred to go to these people and say, I know way more than you do, and
Yes.
give me the job. And they did. But McAllister, our boss at the time, he wanted to hold Fred over because Fred was a wonderful artistic Photoshop person, and he was doing posters, which we would put them up every day, and the participants would steal them off the walls. And so Fred would have to be there to make more, and that was mainly his job. The goal was for our side of the house, the still side of the house, we were doing a 9-projector slideshow into a 36 by 12 foot screen. We were using 9 projectors to get the images up. And Fred was concerned because his bosses, he was supposed to be leaving. He was his end of service, and we held him over for 3 or 4 days. And so I wrote his boss a letter and said, be assured you've made a really good decision. Don't be worried about Fred. He's coming your way. Have a beer, relax, and make sure that and understand that you've made a really good decision in hiring.
Hey, you know, that was street cred. That was street cred because when I got there, they're like, whoa, this guy is valuable. The military wanted to hang on to him and scrape every last bit of his talent out before we get him. That's amazing. Well, you know, so thank you. You increased my value.
That slideshow was a synchronized slideshow, right? With multiple projectors?
Yeah, 9 projectors, three projectors across the screen to get one image out. And that's what got me out of the photojournalism, where I was chief of photojournalism. And the boss saw what I did, not only in doing the show with the help of Chris Lenore, but I also managed to have the equipment show up on time because we were ordering everything while we're under stress, working literally 24 hours a day, taking naps under our desk. And I'm ordering equipment and telling the boss, no problem, it's going to be here. And this is before tracking, before the web where you could check things. And I've got these new projectors coming in. I've got new programming equipment coming in. And we put together this slideshow at the last minute. And it was amazing. It was a really incredible show. Secretary of Defense was there, I believe.
There was a lot. I'm reminded of editing. So each award had to have its own little video for the intro before the award was announced. And I remember sitting on one of those Avids, editing these things, trying to turn them out. There were like 25, 30. There was a lot of little award segments. I remember editing. There was still a ton to go. But then McAllister, God bless him, he wanted to have this video of the Vandenberg base where all these folks were on this cliffside, and it was shot from a helicopter of all these people. And he was like, everybody stop what you're doing and get out there on that cliff. And every single person on the cliff, because for whatever reason, I don't know, people wanted to do something else on this Saturday that weren't part of the Cobb Squadron. But it's like everyone out there.
He made a lot of friends that day. I was a part of that cluster. Yeah, he made a lot of buddies. I think Al Gerloff was the guy that shot it.
Yeah, he was an aerial photographer on that.
I think he shot it because I remember he had to slip the helicopter left because it couldn't shoot it straight on, so he had to shoot out the right door. But so he'd bring it up, hover it, and slide it left to get that panning zoom pull-out shot. Yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah.
I don't think I was actually on the cliff because I think I ignored it and not ignored it, but I was still typing. And McAllister came through. No, it was before it happened. He was doing that final roundup, and he came through and he was like, "Lieutenant Skidmore, you need to be out there." And I think I broke down. I think I was like, "You can't do it all, man. I'm trying to get this done." And it was like, "All right, you stay, do that." And so, yeah, I missed the little adventure out on the cliff.
I have to give Major videos. McAllister a lot of thanks, though, because he kind of, from a video perspective, really pushed the bar of creativity and quality, put a lot of
Big
trust
time.
in us.
Yeah.
We didn't have that type of experience that he had and what he had envisioned, but he believed in us, and he gave us the opportunity to do those things, which is kind of hard coming from the AV field that we were in, because you don't get a lot of opportunity to be creative like that, to have free reign of how you want things to come together. Sometimes it's you capturing it as it happens. With him, it was, let's create it. Let's make it happen. So I have to give him a lot of thanks for that, because he had a small part in what I am today, and actually raising the bar, always shooting for the best, trying to be better than what we had before. You're only as good as the last thing you produced. So if what you produced was crap last week, you better raise the bar. If it was good last week, it better be better this week. You know, I have to give him thanks for that.
I agree.
100%.
I agree.
I agree as well.
I agree. Big time.
He really did raise our game to another level when, he came to Vandenberg and what he did with the unit. 100%.
It wasn't that he had higher standards. It was that he wanted motivation. We already had the standards. He just wanted us to really put our hearts into it.
And he had vision, and I think he shared the idea that you could have vision, to your point, Al, like a vision for what this can be, not just a matter of capturing and working with that, but rather, again, exactly your point on him to make it into something more.
He's kind of like a good example of the Achilles heel of the Air Force, the military in general. McAllister should have been in a different position. I second everything Al said and more so. But there should have been a position created for him like commanding PD or senior PD or something, and got all that commander bullshit off his desk so he could gone out there. Can you imagine what he could have accomplished had he didn't have to get strapped with like endorsing EPRs or making sure decks are going through? And you see the same thing in the aircrew world. This guy could be a killer pilot, but you know what? You're a major now, and we're going to start grooming you for a desk. Forget about killing Johnny Bad Guy. Now we want you to learn how to be an exec officer and all this other bullshit. Yeah, McAllister was fantastic. He should have had his own little world and just let all of us orbit around him. That's my take on it. The commander thing hamstringed him. He could have done so much more, and God, I don't even know how to put it. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
No, I
I have no
agree.
idea what you're talking about.
I mean, I don't know, dude. We can't rewrite the Air Force today, but
Could you repeat that? Could you repeat that?
yeah, write it down.
No, you know what? With Major McAllister leading, I think we could have easily, when the time came where the Air Force wanted to create their own commercials, that's probably something that we could have led from the inside.
Big time.
We had the
Big
talent, we
time.
had the resources, the experience, and especially knowing what it was like, because that's who we were. That's what we did.
I think for the folks on the voice side, this was this gentleman who elevated us. He got the best out of us. He got the extra effort to show our talents and our abilities.
Yeah, so I just want to add one thing. One of the best feelings I got was watching the audience react to the video that we had produced. When it creates a moment where the audience is just like taken back, breathless, or you could put a lump in someone's throat with your visuals, you've done something good. You've had an opportunity to make a difference in that person's life, and you accomplished it. And that was something that he brought to the table.
I agree. I remember one of the best moments of my life was we were doing a Guardian Challenge, and I was on the slideshow side of things with the big multimedia 9 projectors, and I found a piece of music. I won't go into it here, but he walked out of the room shaking his head, saying, "Why didn't I find something like that?" Because he had pushed me to the point that I had to find the music. And when I found it, it was like, he's going to love this. He is going to love this. And he did. He was blown away by the music that I found for the show.
Lessons, guys, after all these years. What part of this experience stayed with you? I know Fred, now you guys went on to do other things. Who wants to start? Well, Bruce, Jim, maybe you guys start, because you retired at Vandenberg, you said, both of you. It was your last assignment. But
Yeah. I retired and then got a job working for at Vandenberg for the Missile Defense Agency, primarily as kind of like a security analyst. But Missile Defense Agency had one photographer, a guy named Henry Norton, great guy, good shooter. He was based out of Huntsville, Alabama. So he was having to travel all over the place for milestones in science and technology and missile defense, and also gripping grins. So I said, dude, why bother coming to Vandenberg? I'm already here. So that's how the whole in-house visual communication role started. And I was with those guys for 7 years, and I had a blast. But I had planned on relocating to South Dakota, and commuting from California to South Dakota is not the easiest thing to do. And one day I said, I'm out of here. So here I sit. Don't really do anything visual anymore other than shooting friends and what have you.
Well, for me, what I picked up from Vandenberg was the digital imaging technology ended up giving me a high level of knowledge that I was able to take into a job after I left the Air Force. And I worked for one of the top imaging labs in the United States as running their scanning department. How do I want to say it? It was next level type work. Hewlett Packard was coming to us with equipment and just giving it to us. Other companies were doing the same thing, but they wanted us to show what their equipment could provide to the rest of the country. And I'm eternally grateful to that.
So, Fred, we already got a preview on yours. You were heading off to the news right after Vandenberg. Where'd that take you?
Yeah. I would say, to answer your initial question, I credit the Air Force and Vandenberg in particular with, like Al said, making me a lot of what I am today in terms of my love of the creative and storytelling and just the leeway that we had on that base. Like Jim was saying, I was creating posters and learning Photoshop. We're in Photoshop version 1, I think it was, or 2 back then. No layers, no channels, nothing. So we're and doing great stuff with what we had. It was just sort of an awesome pressure of create excellent work under sometimes impossible time constraints. Basic physics is pressure makes diamonds, right? So in repetition, makes skill. So we're just doing that stuff over and over again under excruciating deadlines with the expectation of excellence. And I carried that on to what I do almost every day, much to some people's chagrin, right? So,
I agree.
And then, and then so that piece of it, and then going on to, I left the San Jose Mercury News. I went over there as a web designer. Ultimately became the guy that was in charge of all their AV stuff. I was there during the time when Apple released the iMac, the Bondi Blue iMacs and iMovie. So we replaced all of the edit bays that they had with little iMacs with iMovie back then. So it was an interesting sort of transitional time. So I credit the Air Force with kind of like making me a blade in terms of the pursuit of excellence, I guess I'd say. And then I went on to Apple after that, and that sharpened the blade in terms of attention to detail, let's say. So yeah, I don't think I'd be a very different person than I am today had it not been, meeting all you guys and spending time at Vandenberg and, shooting those space launches and just, all the fun. It was an amazing time. One thing I would put out there for people that, that think about the military and think about the Air Force and think, or just the military in general, I have sort of a negative connotation of, I don't want to go in there. You're going to, all this other stuff. And this is my own personal opinion. I think that my experience with being in a situation with people from all backgrounds, all ethnicities, all whatever, and in a situation where failure is not an option, and it's all about the quality of the work product and, location independent. I was in Japan, I was at, Vandenberg, et cetera. Being in those situations, I think makes you a better person and makes you a more well-rounded person versus being siloed in your town and, not being able to, identify and have a conversation with other people. So yeah, it was fantastic. I wouldn't trade that experience for anything.
Well put.
Yeah.
I finished my career at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. And one of the things that I told myself before I got out was I wanted to make myself as marketable as possible. I wanted to know every and all aspects of AV, whether it be shooting, editing, photography, graphic design, storytelling, producing, directing, technical writer, teleprompter, you name it, whatever. I wanted to master it all so that when I stepped out, I gave myself the best opportunity that I could. So I have to give the Air Force many thanks for that because they did afford me that opportunity to learn all those things. In addition to that, working with other units, other branches of service, working with the Army, working with the Navy, working with the Marine Corps and different exercises, working with Navy SEALs, you learn something from each experience. I think that I would like to think that I took a little bit from each experience to kind of help mold who I am today. You work with people of all races, all genders. You come together, like Fred was saying, create a quality product. The Air Force provided that opportunity for me. I don't know if I could have had that same experience anywhere else.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I'll bring it back around to the film stuff. Folks, I was at Vandenberg 3 years, and then I went on to DC for 2 years. assignments there. It'll be a topic of another podcast someday, I'm sure. But after that, got out and moved to LA. And what was really clear is that the military and the film industry, they use the same organizational theory. And I've talked about this on the podcast before, but for folks who are just joining us and then comparing them, where you have a very complicated organizational structure, but it needs to respond very quickly to change. Like all the things we were talking about today, something blows up or something different happens or you need something to do. If you want your organization to respond quickly, you got to push the expertise to the bottom. So the guy who's doing the job, he knows his job. He knows how the change affects his job. And if he understands how he or she interacts with other people in the organization, then the parts can self-adjust so that the entire organization can pivot quickly to address something else. And that's the kind of lessons that made me an AD. That's why I ended up where I was. So didn't regret a day in, didn't regret a day out either, I got to admit. It's certainly a mixed bag being in uniform, but everybody's got to find that sweet spot of where you gain from it, and then, when you can carry that on to other things.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't regret a day. It was awesome.
You'll forever be LT in my book. Sorry.
Yeah, that's
see,
true.
the Pentagon people call me Captain S. See, so I'm just clocking up the nicknames.
Can I tell a story about you real quick?
Let Al tell a story, then you can bring it back around.
The only other thing I was going to say is, and this is outside of visual, but while at Vandenberg, I got to experience going to survival school up in Spokane, Washington for 3 weeks. That's the kind of training that you take with you for the rest of your life. It's an experience that at the time you're probably thinking, why did I ever agree to do this? But when it's all said and done, you build a confidence within yourself that if for whatever reason I end up in a forest or wherever with no food, no water, I can make things happen. I can keep myself alive,
I know which bugs to eat.
Exactly. Which bugs to eat, which ones to stay away from.
And how much better if you've got a video camera with you, Al, as well, and you can make a whole documentary.
Exactly. No, but I mean, again, this is part of the whole Air Force experience. It's not something that I would have experienced outside of the Air Force.
Those were good times.
Yeah, it was.
The best time I ever had. I never want to do again.
Yeah, well said.
Not jealous.
Yeah.
I'm not jealous that I didn't do that myself.
My favorite Skidmore story was he was working a mobility project. We had these platforms that you had to put all your equipment on and slide them onto an airplane, be able to slide them onto an airplane so that they could be transported anywhere in the world. And I walk out into the hangar, and now I do want to caution, he was a young lieutenant, not an old lieutenant, and kind of feeling his way along. And he had about 20 people out in this hangar floor where they kept all the instrumentation cameras for the space launches and things. And only 2 of them were working, loading equipment onto the pallets so that they could be transported to a forward operating location. And I observed for a little bit, and I thought, this is the moment to tell the lieutenant what an enlisted person is all about. And I walked out and I took control of the situation, got all his pallets loaded with everybody involved rather than just the 2 people that were loading the pallets, and had a wonderful time in my mind while I kept telling him, "You're doing a fine job, sir."
Yeah, well, any smart lieutenant knows where to find his NCO expertise. And maybe not out the gate, but it becomes apparent when you.
And that's it. I think it's just learning as you go along and feeling your way along. And you were really good to learning what we were all about. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean learning what we were all about as a group and a cohesive unit, and helping to foster that.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, and I always thought I was very lucky to get to work in audio visual to go into the military. Like that job existed. I decided late in college that I wanted to work in this creative space. And then the military gave me an opportunity to really cut my teeth with it and learning from all you guys. I am really glad we got to revisit this stuff today, guys.
It was fun.
Thanks for having us.
Good day.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Listeners, thanks for indulging me, but that was really a lot of fun. Your feedback is always welcome. You can send email comments to skid, SKID, at belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. Please rate us wherever you get your podcast. It helps us reach new listeners. And new listeners, most of our material is evergreen, so feel free to peruse our past seasons. Maybe another episode will catch your eye. If you're on Facebook, you can find photos and other behind-the-scenes materials at Podcast Below the Line. And finally, you can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram. It's at Pod Below the Line. Thanks to Curtis Bai for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Last bit of news, I'm surprised to report that I've joined another production to manage their COVID protocols, and I suspect that that's going to keep me busy through the end of the year. Most likely, this will be the last podcast of Season 6. And Below the Line will be back with something new again in 2021. Thanks again for listening. Be safe.